Patricia Hill Collins,
Yeah.
who's been writing about this forever. She was writing about this in Black Feminist Thought in 1991, where she was talking. She has a whole chapter titled Towards an Afrocentric Feminist Epistemology. And I just want to use this quote. She discussed and this is a quote, institutions, paradigms, and other elements of the knowledge validation procedure controlled by elite white men and as constituting the Eurocentric masculinist knowledge validation project. So here we are 34 years and later, and she's now been talking about this in terms of epistemic injustice and epistemic oppression. And I just love your work has picked this up and with empirical data. So tell the people what is epistemic exclusion and why is it, how is it related to intersectionality? What is it?
Isis, you want to take that one?
I was going to say you can go ahead. So we think about epistemic exclusion as a form of scholarly devaluation. And the way we've theorized it, which is a little bit different from how Christy Dotson does in her original theorization, is that it's kind of related to two intertwined biases. On the one hand, we have disciplinary biases. So if you think about disciplinary norms, every discipline has its ideas about what makes research quality research, rigorous research, important research. And that often excludes research that, we think about as being on the margins, that is more likely to be conducted by scholars from marginalized groups who are bringing different perspectives, right, to how they think about research. So that's sort of one piece is a kind of disciplinary, I'll call it mismatch. But then there's identity biases that we think are part of this picture in that, people have stereotypes about marginalized groups and they are typically negative. But we used to have a lot of prohibitions about expressing those negative beliefs. And so imagine like if you're, a senior white faculty member and you have some subconscious prejudice towards, let's say, Black women, you can't express that, but you could say, oh, that intersectionality research that we see all those Black women doing, that's, subjective and bias and, sociology or whatever, you can critique the scholarship more easily than the scholar. And so we've been looking at how those kind of come together in the lives of faculty to lead to these experiences of people both in formal settings, so like in an evaluation that you might have in your annual review, being devalued. So ways in which like the metrics that are used to assess your work don't fit the kind of work that you do. But also just sort of in more informal interactions and the way that people treat you. So for example, NiCole and I being given advice not to work with each other, right? That's a sort of informal epistemic exclusion. It's saying that neither of us has anything good to contribute in our research programs. And so they didn't have to tell us that our research was no good, but they still were able to kind of relay that message. So it's those kinds of experiences. And we think about them as, they're kind of often smaller, like bites all the time in the way of microaggressions you think about as like poking you a lot. And that you might have lots of little recurring episodes, but you could also have a couple of major ones. But together, it's this sort of overwhelming, devaluation that makes our faculty not want to be here, not want to do that work.
Anything you'd like to add, Dr. Buchanan or Dr. Jones?
I think I would add maybe a couple more examples. So kind of expanding on what Isa said in terms of formal and informal forms of exclusion, I think a lot of our research has really illuminated some of the ways that exclusion manifests formally. And so some of the examples that come to mind and ones that we've written about include in the context of annual reviews, faculty that are publishing in certain journals or maybe considered niche or diverse or race or gender journals being devalued relative to those that are considered mainstream, certain grants being devalued relative to others. So diversity grants being devalued relative to larger NIH grants that aren't diversity related. We also see just kind of over reliance on publication metrics that we know are inherently biased. So I just wanted to illuminate a few more of those examples of what epistemic exclusion can look like in everyday life and what our data show.
In this era, I'm struck that epistemic exclusion almost sounds so, and I'm talking about, 2025. Epistemic exclusion almost sounds a little genteel because what we're dealing with is, Patricia Hill Collins in her 2017 paper on what is this? Intersectionality, epistemic injustice. She actually uses the word epistemic oppression